A bitter January wind swept through Chicago, leaving the city frozen and the usual Monday rush unnoticed. Office workers rushed to nearby skyscrapers, but barely noticed the people queuing at Hope Hand's Soup Kitchen, regardless of their different backgrounds. Those involved in the homeless community, job loss, military veterans, and single parents wore the same tired but hopeful expression. Inside the warm soup kitchen, volunteers prepared breakfast, with Daniel, a volunteer, serving an elderly veteran before anyone else. No one asked about Daniel's past, only his commitment to serving everyone one Monday a week for 3 years. He arrived before everyone else, donating food, cleaning cooking pots, peeling potatoes, chopping vegetables, and serving guests with a warm smile. In contrast to his successful businessman image, Daniel cared deeply about each person he met. He personally ensured the food was hot before serving, showing kindness and compassion without asking questions about their personal lives. Few could have imagined the origins of Daniel Carter, the founder of Carter Technologies, a successful tech company. Years before his death, his mother volunteered in a similar soup kitchen, reminding him of the importance of seeing the impact of his actions rather than fame. After his mother, his late wife, had volunteered at the same kitchen, she had shared her wisdom with him, emphasizing the importance of seeing the effects of our actions on others. That wisdom guided Daniel through his life, making him a compassionate and empathetic leader, creating a positive impact on many lives without the need for publicity or celebrity status. Daniel quietly followed the little girl as she stepped out into the freezing Chicago morning, carefully balancing the second bowl of soup with both hands. The icy wind whipped through the streets, but she walked slowly, protecting the bowl as if it were the most valuable thing she owned. She crossed 2 busy intersections before stopping outside an aging motel on the edge of downtown. Its faded sign flickered, and several windows were covered with plywood. Daniel watched from across the street as the girl disappeared inside. A few minutes later, Sarah pulled up beside him in her old pickup truck. "You followed her too?" she asked. Daniel nodded. "I've been worried about them for weeks." Sarah explained that the girl's name was Emily Parker, 8 years old. Her mother, Rachel, had worked as a hotel housekeeper until she was laid off when the hotel closed. With no savings and medical bills piling up, they lost their apartment within months. "They've been living in that motel ever since," Sarah said quietly. "Rachel has pneumonia, but she refuses to go to the hospital because she doesn't have health insurance." Daniel stared at the building. "Has anyone tried helping?" "We've helped with food and blankets," Sarah replied. "But the motel owner wants this week's rent by Friday. If they can't pay, they'll be sleeping on the streets." Those words stayed with Daniel all day. By afternoon, he arrived at Carter Technologies for the company's quarterly board meeting. The contrast couldn't have been greater. Marble floors gleamed beneath crystal chandeliers, and executives in tailored suits discussed profits, acquisitions, and stock performance. Richard Lawson, the ambitious vice president, immediately confronted him. "Nice of you to finally join us," Richard said with a forced smile. "The board has been waiting." Daniel took his seat without responding. The meeting began with record-breaking financial results. Revenue had exceeded expectations, and shareholders were celebrating another successful quarter. Then Richard presented the next proposal. "To increase efficiency," he announced, "we'll outsource customer support and eliminate nearly 500 domestic jobs." Several board members nodded in agreement. Daniel's expression hardened. Just an hour earlier, he had looked into the eyes of a child whose family had been destroyed after one lost paycheck. Now he was expected to approve hundreds more layoffs. He slowly closed the report in front of him. "No," he said firmly. The room fell silent. Richard blinked in disbelief. "What do you mean, no?" Daniel looked around the table, his voice calm but unwavering. "We're not building a successful company if our success comes at the cost of families who are already struggling." No one knew what had happened that morning, but everyone could see something had changed in their CEO, and Richard silently realized that Daniel had just become the biggest obstacle to his own plans. The boardroom remained silent long after Daniel Carter rejected the proposal. The executives exchanged uneasy glances. They had never seen their CEO interrupt a presentation so abruptly. Richard Lawson broke the silence. Daniel, this isn't personal. It's business. Eliminating 500 positions will save nearly $40 million a year. Wall Street expects efficiency. Daniel slowly stood and walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Chicago's skyline. Thousands of office lights sparkled below, each one representing people with families, dreams, and responsibilities. Without turning around, he asked, "How many of you have ever had to tell your child there wouldn't be dinner tonight?" No one answered. "How many of you have ever lost your home because one paycheck disappeared?" Again, silence filled the room. Daniel turned to face them. "I met an 8-year-old girl this morning who divides one bowl of soup into 2 meals because her mother is too sick to leave a motel room. Her family didn't fail because they were lazy. They failed because life hit them harder than they could recover." Several board members lowered their eyes. Richard folded his arms. "With respect, one emotional story can't determine corporate strategy." Daniel looked directly at him. "No, but 500 stories just like hers should." The meeting ended without a vote, leaving Richard furious. Later that evening, Daniel returned to Hope Hand's soup kitchen after closing hours. Sarah was locking the front door when she saw him. "I thought you'd be at work." "I was," Daniel replied. "Now I need your help." He explained that he wanted to visit Rachel Parker. Sarah hesitated. "They're proud people, Daniel. Rachel doesn't like accepting charity." "I'm not bringing charity." "What are you bringing?" "Hope." Sarah smiled and handed him a paper bag filled with fresh groceries, medicine, and blankets donated earlier that day. When they knocked on the motel room door, a weak voice answered. "Emily, is that you?" Rachel Parker looked exhausted. Her face was pale, and a persistent cough interrupted every sentence. The tiny room contained only 2 narrow beds, a microwave, and a few plastic bags holding everything they owned. Emily's face lit up. "Mom, it's Daniel from the soup kitchen." Rachel struggled to sit up. "I'm sorry you had to see us like this." Daniel shook his head gently. "You never have to apologize for surviving." As they talked, Daniel noticed a framed certificate hanging crookedly on the wall. It was an Employee of the Year award from a luxury hotel 5 years earlier. "You earned this?" he asked. Rachel smiled faintly. "I loved my job. I worked there for 12 years. Daniel recognized the hotel's name immediately. It belonged to a real estate company that Carter Technologies had recently partnered with. For the first time, he realized that the people behind corporate decisions weren't just numbers on spreadsheets. They had faces. They had children. And one of those children had unknowingly changed the heart of one of America's most powerful CEO. Daniel barely slept that night. Rachel Parker's small motel room kept replaying in his mind. The peeling wallpaper, the broken heater struggling against the Chicago winter, and Emily pretending everything was okay so her mother wouldn't worry. The next morning, instead of heading straight to headquarters, Daniel asked his executive assistant to pull Rachel's employment records from the hotel chain Carter Technologies had partnered with. Within an hour, the report landed on his desk. Rachel hadn't been fired for poor performance. In fact, she had received outstanding evaluations for more than a decade. When the hotel changed ownership, hundreds of employees were laid off to reduce labor costs. Their severance packages were minimal, and many longtime workers lost their health insurance almost immediately. Daniel clenched his jaw. On paper, it had been called a successful restructuring. In real life, it had destroyed families. Later that afternoon, he called an emergency executive meeting. The board expected another discussion about quarterly profits. Instead, Daniel projected photographs onto the conference room screen. Not names, not numbers, but ordinary Americans whose lives had been affected by corporate layoffs. A former hotel housekeeper, a warehouse employee, a single father who had worked 20 years before losing his job. "No financial charts today," Daniel said. "Today we're talking about people." Richard Lawson leaned back in his chair, clearly irritated. "Daniel, investors aren't paying us to solve every social problem in America. They're paying us to build a company people can be proud of," Daniel replied. He introduced a new proposal. Instead of eliminating 500 jobs, Carter Technologies would launch a nationwide workforce transition program. Employees whose positions became unnecessary would receive paid retraining, career counseling, healthcare coverage during the transition, and priority placement in new roles. The room erupted with objections. It'll cost millions. Our stock price will drop. Shareholders won't like this. Daniel listened without interrupting. Then he quietly said, "A business that succeeds by abandoning loyal workers eventually loses something money can't replace, its integrity." Several board members remained unconvinced. Richard saw an opportunity. That evening, he secretly contacted a business reporter. "If you want tomorrow's biggest corporate story," he whispered over the phone, "look into where Daniel Carter spends every Monday morning. You might discover America's most mysterious CEO isn't who investors think he is." The next morning, as Daniel unloaded food boxes behind Hope Hand Soup Kitchen, he noticed a black SUV parked across the street. A cameraman adjusted his lens. A reporter stepped onto the sidewalk with a microphone in hand. Daniel immediately realized someone had uncovered his secret. He wasn't worried about his reputation. He was worried about what the sudden media attention might do to Emily, Rachel, and every person who came to the soup kitchen, simply hoping for a warm meal without becoming tomorrow's headline. The reporter spotted Daniel before he reached the back entrance of Hope Hand's Soup Kitchen. "Mr. Carter," she called, weaving through the small crowd gathering on the sidewalk. "Is it true you're the CEO of Carter Technologies? Why have you been hiding your volunteer work?" Camera lights flickered on. A microphone was held inches from his face. Several guests waiting in line turned around in surprise. "The Billionaire CEO? That's Daniel?" Emily, standing near the entrance with her empty soup container, looked confused. She stared at the man she thought was simply a kind volunteer. Daniel took a slow breath before answering. "I haven't been hiding anything." "Then why keep it a secret?" another reporter asked. "Because this place isn't about me." He glanced toward the people waiting patiently in the cold. "Every person standing in this line deserves privacy and dignity. They didn't come here to become part of someone's headline." The reporters fell unusually quiet. Daniel continued, "If cameras are here because I'm wealthy, you're pointing them at the wrong person." He pointed toward Mr. Wilson, the elderly Marine veteran who volunteered every Wednesday despite struggling to pay his own rent. "There's a man who served this country." Then he pointed toward a single mother helping another family carry groceries. "There's someone working 2 jobs while still finding time to help strangers." Finally, he smiled at Emily. "And there's an 8-year-old girl who refuses to eat until she knows her mother has food too." Those are the stories worth telling. The cameras slowly turned away from Daniel and toward the people he had quietly honored. Later that afternoon, clips of the interview spread across television stations and social media. Millions of Americans praised Daniel for refusing to make charity about himself. But not everyone was celebrating. Inside Carter Technologies, Richard Lawson slammed his office door. "This wasn't supposed to happen," he muttered. Instead of embarrassing Daniel, the interview had made him even more respected. Richard knew he needed a different strategy. He began digging through old corporate records, searching for anything that could damage Daniel's reputation. Meanwhile, Daniel received an unexpected phone call. It was the owner of the motel where Rachel and Emily were staying. "I'm calling because your friend Rachel Parker is being evicted tonight," the man said bluntly. "Her payment deadline expired an hour ago." Daniel looked at the clock. It was already after 8 p.m. Without another word, he grabbed his car keys and rushed out of the office. Snow had started falling heavily across Chicago, turning the roads slick with ice. As he sped toward the motel, one thought raced through his mind, and paramedics were fighting to keep her alive. He had promised Rachel hope. He refused to let that promise arrive too late. When Daniel finally pulled into the motel parking lot, flashing police lights reflected off the falling snow. Emily stood outside crying. Rachel was lying on a stretcher. Daniel jumped out of his car before it had fully stopped. Snow swirled through the motel parking lot as he ran toward the ambulance. "Emily!" he shouted. The little girl turned and immediately ran into his arms. She was trembling uncontrollably. "They said Mom couldn't breathe," she cried. "They said she might not wake up." Daniel knelt beside her. "Hey, look at me." Emily wiped her tears. "Your mom is fighting, and right now the doctors are helping her. She's not alone." For the first time that night, the little girl seemed to breathe normally. Nearby, paramedics loaded Rachel into the ambulance. One of them approached Daniel. Are you family? Daniel hesitated. No. The paramedic looked at Emily standing beside him. Then you're probably the closest thing she has. Those words hit harder than Daniel expected. Minutes later, they arrived at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. Rachel was rushed into intensive care while Emily sat silently in a waiting room chair, clutching a worn stuffed rabbit. Hours passed. The hospital grew quieter as midnight approached. Daniel remained beside her the entire time. Eventually, Emily looked up. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why do you keep helping us? Daniel wasn't prepared for the question. The truth was complicated. Years ago, when Carter Technologies was just a struggling startup, he had nearly lost everything. His mother had worked double shifts at a diner to keep food on the table. There were nights when she skipped meals so he could eat. He remembered the fear, the uncertainty, the feeling that one bad day could change everything. Because someone helped my family when we needed it most, he said softly. Emily nodded. My mom says good people don't disappear when things get hard. Daniel smiled. Your mom sounds very wise. Around 2 a.m., a doctor finally entered the waiting room. Daniel immediately stood. How is she? The doctor smiled faintly. She's stable. Emily burst into tears of relief. But, the doctor continued, Rachel's recovery won't be quick. She'll need medication, follow-up treatment, and a safe place to live once she's discharged. Daniel already knew what that meant. The motel was gone. They had nowhere to return to. The next morning, while Rachel slept in recovery, Daniel made several phone calls. By noon, he had arranged temporary housing, medical support, and educational assistance for Emily. For the first time in months, their future looked brighter. But just as Daniel began feeling hopeful, his phone buzzed. It was a message from the Carter Technologies board. Emergency meeting. Attendance required. Attached was a document. The title made his stomach drop. Motion to remove Daniel Carter as CEO. Richard Lawson had finally made his move. And this time, Daniel wasn't sure he could stop him. Daniel walked into Carter Technologies headquarters early the next morning. The building buzzed with nervous conversations. Employees stopped what they were doing as he crossed the lobby. Some smiled, others looked away, unsure what was happening after news of the board meeting had spread overnight. When the elevator doors opened on the executive floor, Daniel found Richard Lawson waiting outside the conference room. I hope you enjoyed playing the hero, Richard said with a smug smile. Because today you're going to learn that shareholders care more about profits than feelings. Daniel met his eyes without flinching. We'll see. Inside the boardroom, 12 directors sat around a polished oak table. A thick folder lay in front of each of them. Richard stood first. Ladies and gentlemen, our CEO has allowed personal emotions to interfere with sound business judgment. He's rejected cost-saving measures, committed company resources to expensive social programs, and spent company time on activities unrelated to shareholder value. He paused dramatically. Our responsibility is to protect this company. Several board members nodded. Richard continued. I therefore move that Daniel Carter be removed as CEO, effective immediately. A heavy silence filled the room. The chairman turned to Daniel. You have the floor. Daniel stood, but instead of opening the folder in front of him, he placed a single photograph on the conference table. It was a picture of Emily sitting beside her mother's hospital bed, holding Rachel's hand while trying to smile. Yesterday, Daniel began calmly, I spent the night with an 8-year-old girl who thought she might lose her only parent. The room remained quiet. That little girl doesn't know what a stock price is. She doesn't understand quarterly earnings or operating margins. She only knows that her mother worked hard for years, lost her job, lost her health insurance, and almost lost her life. He looked around the room. If success means creating more families like hers, then I have failed as a leader. One board member leaned forward. What exactly are you proposing? Daniel clicked a remote, and the screen behind him lit up. Instead of a resignation letter, it displayed a bold new initiative. The Carter Second Chance Program. The plan included paid job training, emergency financial assistance, mental health support, childcare partnerships, and healthcare continuation for employees facing layoffs. It isn't charity, Daniel explained. It's an investment in the people who built this company. Several directors began reading the proposal with growing interest. Richard's confident expression disappeared for the first time, and as the board members exchanged stunned looks, he realized he had underestimated the one group whose voices mattered most, the people who came to work every single day. Then the conference room doors suddenly opened. The corporate secretary rushed inside, slightly out of breath. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said. "What is it?" the chairman asked. She swallowed hard. "More than 3,000 Carter Technologies employees have signed a letter." Daniel looked surprised. "They're all outside the building." "What does the letter say?" someone asked. The secretary smiled. "They're asking the board to keep Daniel Carter as CEO." The board chairman looked from the stack of employee letters to Daniel, then to Richard. The atmosphere in the room had completely changed. What Richard expected to be a routine vote was now becoming a public test of leadership. "Before we continue," the chairman said, "I think we should hear from the people who signed these letters." A large screen flickered to life. One by one, recorded messages from Carter Technologies employees began playing. The first was a software engineer from Seattle. "I joined this company because Daniel believed in me when nobody else did. When my wife was diagnosed with cancer, he personally approved extended paid leave. He never asked for recognition." The second message came from a warehouse supervisor in Ohio. "Last year, a tornado destroyed my home. I was ready to quit so I could take care of my family. Instead, Mr. Carter arranged temporary housing and told me, 'Family comes first. Your job will still be here.'" Another employee appeared on the screen. "I've worked for 3 CEOs. Daniel is the only one who knows my name." The room fell silent. Richard shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He had spent years studying financial reports. Daniel had spent years investing in people. Just then, the chairman's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and frowned. "Interesting." "What is it?" another director asked. "Our largest institutional investor just sent an email." Richard smiled, convinced it would support his position. Instead, the chairman read aloud. "Companies don't become great by maximizing profits alone. They become great by earning public trust. We fully support Daniel Carter's long-term vision." Richard's smile vanished. At that exact moment, another notification appeared. News channels across America were reporting on the employee movement outside Carter Technologies. Thousands of workers stood together in the cold, not demanding higher salaries or bonuses, but asking the board to keep their CEO. Outside the headquarters, reporters interviewed employees holding handmade signs. "Leadership is service. People before profits. Keep Daniel Carter." Watching the live broadcast from the boardroom window, Daniel felt humbled. He had never asked anyone to defend him. The chairman slowly closed his folder. "I believe we've underestimated something," he said quietly. Richard interrupted. "This is emotional pressure. The board shouldn't be influenced by public opinion." "No," the chairman replied, "but we should be influenced by character." Before anyone could respond, Daniel's phone vibrated. It was a text from Sarah at Hope Hand's Soup Kitchen. Rachel just woke up. The first thing she asked was whether Emily had eaten breakfast. Daniel smiled. Even after everything Rachel had endured, her first thought was still her daughter. At that moment, Daniel knew exactly why he had fought so hard. Not just for Rachel and Emily, but for every family whose quiet acts of love deserved a chance to survive. The final vote was only minutes away, and no one in the room could predict how it would end. The chairman looked around the boardroom one final time before speaking. "We've heard both sides," he said. "It's time to vote." One by one, the directors marked their ballots. Daniel remained calm. He had already accepted that leadership wasn't about holding a title. If helping families like Rachel's cost him his position, he could live with that. Richard, however, sat rigidly in his chair. He had spent months planning this moment. Every conversation, every rumor, every carefully timed leak to the media had been aimed at removing Daniel from power. The corporate secretary collected the ballots and quietly counted them. No one spoke. Even the city traffic outside seemed to fade into silence. Finally, she handed the results to the chairman. He adjusted his glasses and looked first at Daniel, then at Richard. "The motion to remove Daniel Carter as chief executive officer." He paused. has failed. Richard's shoulders dropped. The board has also voted to unanimously approve the Carter Second Chance program. A wave of relief swept across the room. Several directors began applauding. Daniel didn't. Instead, he simply thanked them. I promise you this company will prove that compassion and success can grow together. As the meeting ended, Richard gathered his papers without saying a word. Richard, Daniel called. Richard stopped but didn't turn around. I know you wanted this company to succeed. Richard laughed bitterly. You think this is over? Daniel shook his head. I think everyone deserves a second chance. Richard finally faced him. After everything I've done? You made choices I don't agree with, Daniel replied. But if I believe people can rebuild their lives, that belief has to apply to everyone. Richard stood speechless. No accusations, no revenge, no humiliation, just grace. Meanwhile, across town, Rachel was discharged from the hospital. Volunteers from Hope Hands helped her move into a small furnished apartment that Daniel had quietly arranged through a local housing nonprofit. When Rachel walked through the front door, tears filled her eyes. Emily raced from room to room. Mom, we each have our own bed. Rachel covered her mouth, unable to speak. For the first time in months, they had a safe place to call home. That evening, Daniel stopped by carrying 2 grocery bags. Emily ran to hug him. You kept your promise, she whispered. Daniel smiled. No. He looked around the warm apartment. We all kept it. As they shared dinner around a small kitchen table, Daniel noticed something he hadn't seen in Rachel's face before. Peace. But the greatest surprise was still waiting. Rachel handed Daniel a neatly folded envelope she had found among her old employment papers. I think this belongs to you, she said quietly. Daniel opened it. His expression changed instantly. Inside was a handwritten letter from his late mother, dated 25 years earlier. He recognized. A week later, the story of Hope Hand's Soup Kitchen had spread across the country. News stations no longer focused on Daniel Carter's wealth. Instead, they highlighted something far more powerful, the belief that business success and human compassion could exist side by side. Letters poured into Carter Technologies from every state. Veterans thanked the company for creating new hiring programs. Single parents shared stories of finally finding stable jobs. Small business owners offered to partner with the Carter Second Chance program, hoping to give struggling families a fresh start. But Daniel wasn't interested in celebrating. Early Monday morning, just as he had done for the past 3 years, he pulled on his faded jeans, gray hoodie, and worn work boots. He parked several blocks away and quietly walked to Hope Hand's Soup Kitchen before sunrise. When Sarah unlocked the front door, she smiled. I had a feeling you'd be here. Daniel picked up an apron and tied it around his waist. People still need breakfast. Within minutes, he was washing vegetables, brewing coffee, and greeting familiar faces. Nothing about him had changed. Around 9 o'clock, the front door opened. Rachel walked in, healthier than before, holding Emily's hand. The volunteers stopped what they were doing. Emily ran straight to Daniel and wrapped her arms around him. We have something to tell you, she said excitedly. Rachel smiled through grateful tears. I started my new job today. Daniel's eyes lit up. A local hotel hired me as a guest services supervisor, Rachel said. Not because of your name, because they gave me a chance to interview. And guess what? Emily added proudly. Mom doesn't need the soup kitchen anymore. Rachel gently corrected her. No, sweetheart. She looked around the room filled with volunteers. We'll always need this place. She picked up an apron from the counter. If it's okay with Sarah, we'd like to volunteer every Monday. Sarah laughed. I was hoping you'd say that. As the morning rush slowed, Daniel stepped outside for a breath of fresh air. He unfolded the letter from his mother once more. Her handwriting was as familiar as ever. Daniel, if life blesses you with more than you need, don't build a taller fence. Build a longer table. The people sitting around it will become your greatest legacy. He folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into his wallet. Years ago, he thought success meant building the biggest technology company in America. Now he understood something far more valuable. Success was hearing a little girl laugh because she finally felt safe. It was watching a mother regain her dignity after believing she had lost everything. It was proving that kindness could inspire thousands of employees, transform an entire company, and remind strangers that they mattered. Months later, Carter Technologies reported record profits, not despite its compassion, but alongside it. Other companies began adopting similar employee support programs, inspired by Daniel's example. Yet every Monday morning before the city fully woke, one familiar volunteer was already inside Hope Hand's soup kitchen, quietly serving hot meals with a warm smile. Most new visitors never recognized him, and that was exactly the way Daniel Carter wanted it. The end.